Thank you, Shruti Madam. It's my great honor to invite chairpersons of the next session, Dr. Rakhi Agrawal Madam and Dr. Pratibha Borse Madam. Dr. Rakhi Agrawal Madam is from Thane and she is editor of Mahima, the bulletin of IMA there. Welcome, Dr. Agrawal Madam. I also welcome Dr. Pratibha Borse Madam. She is a very active member from Women's Wing IMA Nashik. Welcome, Madam. COVID pandemic has it's a testing time for all of the us health workers. The fallout and the fallacies of the healthcare system, and the disease itself is taking an immense toll on all of us. But we have some heroes amongst us. Actually, they are our lighthouses. They are fighting on both the fronts, the disease itself, and are simultaneously protecting the interests of doctor fraternity. And when the hero is a woman, I must not tell you on how many fronts she led. We have one such hero amongst us today. It's proud privilege of Ivacon 2020 to have honorable and very respectable Dr. Archana Pate Madam, who is a physician and intensivist and is an elected MMC member. Madam Dr. Archana Pate is a chairperson of COVID Task Force IMA Dombivli. She is also COVID Task Force member of KDMC. She is literally chasing away the virus. She is managing the COVID ambulances and maintaining the COVID dashboard of KDMC. She is the convener of Ethical Medical Committee, MMC. She drives Mission Pink Health and Aao Gaon Chale. She is a national coordinator of WDWIM and has been a past president of IMA Dombivli. I invite you, Madam Dr. Archana Pate, for your talk on COVID-19, demystifying the enigma.
Thank you, Dr. Rashmi Kar, for that kind introduction. Am I audible to everybody?
Yes, yes. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. So, Honorable MP Shri Navneet Rana ji, basically, it was a nice thing to be invited into a women's conference, being a woman doctor, dealing with COVID. And as we heard from the Honorable MP that, you need to first stand for yourself. So when the COVID started, it was new for every one of us. And, the worst something befallens you is my parents became COVID first. Okay, so I did not know anything about COVID at that point of time because COVID had just come in India. And this is what I'm talking is about way back early in April, when it was still considered a social taboo, a big time taboo it was considered. And that is when I, took care of them and I went through all the probably mental trauma that the relatives of the patients go through, or the hardships that, being a doctor but still feeling helpless about not being able to do a lot for my parents, that, prompted me into getting into COVID in a big way. And yes, we are very happy. KDMC is observing somewhere, the tally that we are reaching is about 44,000 patients of COVID. And we started peaking up, right in April, and we had first peak in July end. And that was where it was chaotic. And we are almost witnessing a second peak right now, but the things are not so bad, not so stressful. And yes, COVID has been a big enigma, and you need to go through it, you need to work with it, you need to deal with it to be able to slightly demystify it and learn about the nitty-gritties of it. So I'll try to make this as simple as possible. With due regards to the President IMA Amravati, Dr. Rohankar, Secretary Dr. Ashish Sabu, Convener IMA MS IFCON Dr. Dinesh Thakre, Chairperson IMA MS Women Doctors Wing Dr. Jagruti Shah. So I would just be sharing my screen. Can the host please enable the screen sharing for me?
Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
I'll try again. Yeah.
Yes, madam. Yes, madam.
Okay.
Please go
Yes,
ahead.
yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Just one sec. The screen is not visible to me. I'll make it visible to myself. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So is the screen visible to all? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, madam.
Is the screen visible to all?
Yes, madam.
Yeah, okay. So we'll just go through the basics really fast. Coronavirus has been with us for last, a few hundred years. There are four, genera of coronavirus: alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. The beta coronavirus, they are supposed to be, something giving serious disease. And what we are witnessing right now is a novel beta coronavirus. Why we say novel? Because our body has never really encountered this particular coronavirus before. It is something new which has come up. This was designated as COVID-19, that is coronavirus disease discovered in 2019, and was given nomenclature of SARS-CoV, that is severe acute respiratory syndrome caused by coronavirus, which is of the second variety, because the first was seen in 2003, that was SARS, and then later was MERS. So these were both coronaviruses. What is the difference between SARS, MERS, and SARS-CoV-2? Is that SARS saw somewhere about, in the range of 20 to 30,000 patients. MERS saw about 8,000 patients, went across about 26 to 27 countries. But what we are witnessing over here is like a huge number spread across the entire globe. It is highly infectious, though with a moderate mortality. The mortality rate was more in SARS and MERS. It is a zoonotic virus, and it is supposedly transmitted from the bats in China. The incubation period, what do we understand by incubation period, is from the moment the virus enters your body and starts showing the symptoms of the disease, is what we call as incubation period. It is anywhere between 1 to 14 days. So this is just a small statistics that we'll fast go through, because this will just give us an enormity of the infection that we are dealing with. So as of 26 September, 32.5 million confirmed cases are there of COVID-19. Nearly 1 million deaths reported by WHO. Though China alerted of flu-like cases, resembling SARS on 31st December 2019, it took about 2.5 months for WHO to call it a pandemic. On 30th January, India saw, reported its first case of COVID-19 in Kerala. There were 3 cases by 3rd February. On 4th March, there were 22 new cases. And after this, we have never really looked back, and we are just rising the graph like anything. Presently, India has approximately 5.9 million cases, of which 1.3 million cases are alone in Maharashtra. And the last I read MEDT report, Amravati and Amravati Municipal Corporation is seeing somewhere around in the range of 9,000 cases, though I really don't have any idea about the active number of cases. But we do have a low death rate compared to the world, that is 2.68%. So I think by now we all know about the routes of infection. It is spread by aerosols, droplet infection, and query by fomites. Aerosols is when somebody coughs, sneezes, and there are large droplets, large particles, which are rather droplets, large particles which are formed, and they fall about 6 feet, and then the person who's standing just opposite may immediately get infected. The aerosols are, somewhere, they are very small in diameter, less than 5 micrometer diameter. They travel not only for a longer distance, but they stay in your environment for about, it is said that up to about 3 hours. So if somebody who's infected has coughed in a closed environment, in the last some time, and then you happen to enter that environment, the virus is maybe there, and you may get infected. Fomites, somebody who's coughed, sneezed, and touched the mouth with a hand. That person happens to touch some surface, and a susceptible host happens to touch that surface and happens to touch the mouth, and nose area, because the portal of entry are supposed to be eyes, nose, and mouth. So anybody touches this particular region, and they may get infected with the virus. So what does the virus do? Basically, the virus needs ACE2 receptors to gain entry into the cell. And for doing that, it needs help of TMPRSS2 protease. Okay, so, and these ACE2 receptors are seen in abundance in various organs of our body. That is the lungs, the intestines, the hearts, the livers, the kidneys, even in brains, the eyes. So it is seen in abundance in many of the organs, and there is even presence of TMPRSS2 protease enzyme, and which makes it easier for the virus to enter the cells. Once it enters the cell, it practically hijacks the machinery of the cell, and it leads to transcription, translation, and formation of more copies of the virus. That is the phase of virus multiplication, and more viruses are released into the circulation. So this is basically, I think it will be difficult to understand this particular diagram so early. We will go through the further slides, and then we will, come to know about this particular diagram. So this virus, once it enters into the body and it starts multiplying, it goes through 3 phases. The phase 1 is the early infection stage, where there is virus spread and proliferation, and your body's initial innate immunity has come into play. So what you get is, mild viremia. All features of viremia, which we know are multisystemic. You get, problems here, there, in different places, like GI symptoms, then upper respiratory symptoms, then you may get malaise, headache, body ache. So all constitutional symptoms, mild respiratory symptoms, adaptive immunity stage with falling titers of the virus and resolution of the symptoms. That is, if adaptive immunity starts taking place, it starts taking the stage, then the virus will fall in numbers and your symptoms will recover, and probably the person will not worsen beyond this phase. Now, if the virus happens to escape this phase, it enters the pulmonary stage. So your viruses are now into the lungs, and what we see is that they are multiplying abundantly. There is pulmonary tissue injury, there is pulmonary vasodilatation, increased endothelial permeability, there is leukocyte recruitment. This leads to further pulmonary damage to the leukocytes, damage to the pneumocytes, and the macrophages are activated. There is hypoxemia, there is cardiovascular stage. And the third phase, if it goes beyond this stage, it enters into the hyperinflammatory stage, where we see exacerbation of the immune response. So the immune response becomes completely dysregulated. It is at this phase where, the cytokine activity is, at its peak. And now a new theory has come in, which is talking about dysregulated bradykinin signaling in these kind of patients. And now the cytokines and the bradykinin, they induce a lot of damage onto the various parts of the body. So there is multi-organ damage, which we see in this phase. We see the patients going into severe lung injury. We see the patients going into ARDS, acute cardiac injury, heart failure, shock, multi-organ involvement. Patients become susceptible to secondary bacterial infections. And there is, more hypercoagulability seen in the patients, which can lead to thromboembolic complications. Now, who are likely to have severe disease? I think everybody's heard by now that 80% of the patients are asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. Maybe about 15% of the patients will have, moderate kind of a disease, whereas only 5% of the patients will have severe disease needing ICU admission. So who are likely to have severe disease? So we are talking basically about all the comorbid factors. Patients with obesity, senior citizens above 60 years, patients with diabetes, hypertension, IHD, all the chronic lung illnesses, COPD, bronchial asthma, immunocompromised state, patients who are on immunosuppressive drugs, patients with CKD. The list is still much more, but these are the major comorbid conditions. So what happens? Once the patient is exposed to SARS-CoV, either there will be no infection, your body will just fight it out, not allow it to manifest itself, so there will be no infection. So number of diagnosed cases, of SARS-CoV-2, which we happen to find on the testing, but they are having no symptoms or mildly symptomatic. the people who did not, manifest the infection but got infected, that number is much more than the people who are diagnosed with infection. So, probably it is twice or thrice the number of cases which we are seeing detected. Now, out of the person who has infection, either that person will be symptomatic or asymptomatic. For the patient who is, symptomatic, either they'll have a mild disease, a moderate disease, or a severe disease. A mild may recover or may progress to moderate. The moderate may recover or may progress to severe. The severe may progress to recovery or may go into the cytokine storm and the complications and then death. So if you see in the initial phases, our immune system is trying to take up, but as we see later in the course of the illness, what we are seeing is immune dysregulation and activation of the cytokine pathway and the bradykinin system. And that is where the major problem starts coming in. Now, what are the signs and symptoms that we see? Basically, the signs and symptoms of mild illness are like more or less same with, what we see in majority of the viral illnesses. Fever, cough, sore throat, malaise, headache, anosmia. Now, this anosmia is more or less practically, it is exclusive to, loss of smell is practically exclusive to the COVID infection, where they say that the olfactory nerves are involved. So it is a CNS complication, CNS involvement, and not plain just, loss of smell. But it is milder in variety, less of taste, diarrhea, weakness. In any varying combinations, you may get it. The moderate patients, how do you call them moderate? Is, there are clinical features. Patients say that we have tightness of the chest, we have dyspnea, hypoxia, fever, cough. You may see a saturation which is dropping either by itself or on a walk test. The respiratory rate may be up to, if it is up to 24, you may, label it as a moderate case. Severe, anything beyond this, you have to label it as severe. We are seeing patients of MI, patients of stroke, patients of Guillain-Barré syndrome, patients coming with, you name it, a surgical complication, and they are turning out to be COVID positive. Basically, in severe, what you see is more of an inflammatory damage and more of the damage because of the hypercoagulable status. So more of the thromboembolic events we start seeing in this phase. And so the patients who enter in this phase are extremely, we have to deal cautiously with them. Now the severity, we have, we classified the severity as per the clinical signs and symptoms. Now we see, because we have seen that there is a tendency in the family physicians or even the patients have now, rather than going for the test, they're directly going for an HRCT. And we have patients who are coming to us with HRCT, but without any COVID report. So there is a proper gradation given to the HRCT report, and we can, classify the severity as per the HRCT score. As we all know, the lungs have, two lungs. The right lung has 3 lobes and the left lung has 2 lobes. In each lobe, so in 5 lobes each, we are talking about each lobe. In each lobe, depending upon the area of involvement, it is scored as 1 to 5. Okay, so per lobe, we will have percentage of involvement from say 5% to 75% of one lobe involvement. And based on this, it is given a score from 1 to 5. So now this we have to, add up the scores of all the lobes involved. In one lobe, it may be, a score of, say, 2. In another lobe, it may be a score of 3. So you add up all the scores, and now you have a score coming out of 25. Okay, because of the 5 lobes, each lobe has a maximum score of 5. So a total score of less than 8 on 25, we categorize it as mild. Between 9 to 15, we categorize it as moderate. And more than 15, we categorize it as severe COVID infection. But mind you, if the patient comes with COVID report, you will read a CORAD score of 6, and the same patient with the same CT findings, if they have no COVID report with them, they will be given a CORAD score of 5. So CORAD score of 5 and 6 is not different in severity. CORAD score 5 and 6 is just the presence or absence of COVID positive report with that patient. So now, we immediately, as the patient comes to us, in the OPD, if the patients have come to us, we need to tell them what to do once they have been detected COVID positive. Or if we see the CT presentation of COVID on these patients, so we ask them to do certain investigations. We ask them to, start on certain treatment based on the investigations. We will, the clinical severity and the investigations will tell us how do we expect this patient to be. So certain investigations, they have a prognostic value, and they are called as red flag investigations. Like if the markers of these investigations go beyond a certain value, you have to anticipate that this patient is likely to deteriorate, and you have to be really, really watchful on that patient, even if the patient is asymptomatic. Okay, so lymphopenia less than 2000, PO2 FiO2 ratio on ABG less than 300, neutrophils to lymphocyte ratio of more than 3.5, LDH more than 245. A resting tachycardia should really prompt you to be more careful on that patient. A prothrombin time of more than 16 seconds, serum ferritin levels more than 300, D-dimer twice normal value. Rising CRP is an extremely wonderful indicator of the progress of illness of your patient. A very small investigation, but it will give you a beautiful indication as to whether your patient's problems are worsening or whether your patient is improving. A positive walk test on the patient means that the lungs are involved and the patient is becoming hypoxic on doing some exertion, or SpO2 at rest of less than 94. I'll just like to tell you about one of my patients, just based on these investigations. I had a patient coming to me 10 days back, and she came with she was asymptomatic, and all she had, I asked her to do certain investigations, and all she had was a D-dimer which was 1284. Okay, and then I told them to put on low molecular weight heparin. They did not really listen, and the KDMC put them into the quarantine center. 10 days, no investigation was done, nothing was done on the patient. The patient was asymptomatic. On the day of discharge from the quarantine center, the patient had one episode of fever. The patient started having sweating. Patient was having much more sweating, and the patient was having, mottling, like that is hyperemic. Hands and legs were like reddish. Okay, so that patient came to me, and I told her, please repeat the investigations and do a CT. The CT showed a CORAD score of 10 on 25. The patient was not symptomatic at that point of time, besides that one episode of fever and the sweating. The D-dimer had increased to 1800 by then. Yesterday, patient got admitted to me yesterday evening at 6 o'clock. At 6 o'clock, we started on a low molecular weight, and we were just observing her. At night, 4 o'clock, she went into cytokine storm. She just got up to go to the bathroom. She suddenly became breathless. Her saturation dropped to 88. It was so sudden. And her BP dropped to 80 by 60. She became tachypneic. And immediately she had to be rushed into the ICU. We had to put her on steroids. We had to start her on, higher antibiotics and, vasopressor support and everything. But this can be this sudden. So you have to be really, really watchful on the patient's investigations also, in addition to the symptoms. And what all will tell us whether the patient, can be admitted into the wards, or the patient is, even if you don't find them so bad, the patient is probably going to need ICU admission. Obviously, the need for ventilator, need for vasopressor goes without saying. Hypotension, respiratory rate more than 24 should be in ICU. Presence of respiratory distress, abdominothoracic breathing. SpO2 less than 90% on oxygen at 6 liters. The partial pressure of oxygen on ABG showing less than 60, confusion in the patient, thrombocytopenia. As I've already said, neutrophil lymphocyte ratio more than 3.5, multilobar involvement on the CT, and presence of renal involvement should prompt you to put that patient in the ICU and observe further. Now, we have just spoken about the cytokine release syndrome. See, basically, remember, in a COVID patient who comes to you, most important thing is, give the number of days to the onset of illness. Ask the patient whether in last 10 days, the patient has had any episode of fever or any symptoms of viremia. Because there are many patients who present to you directly on 7th or 8th day with fever or weakness or anything. And we tend to take that as day 1 of illness. But we will miss something most important if we do this. So you need to always ask patients who come to you with probably lung involvement, desaturation, or anything of this sort, that did you have any sort of fever or any viral symptoms in last 10 days? If they say yes, then that becomes their day one of illness. Okay, and this cytokine release syndrome, what we see as the worst probably phase in a COVID patient, is generally it presents between the 8th to 12th day of illness, not from the day of COVID positive report, but from the day of onset of first symptoms. This we have already gone through. The clinical features are high-grade fever, tachycardia, shortness of breath, worsening of hypoxia, hypotension. If not treated early, can lead to multi-organ dysfunction or macrophage activation syndrome. And these patients have very high levels of CRP, IL-6, and tissue plasminogen activator levels are less. And these patients are in prothrombotic stage, so they're much more prone to thromboembolic events. And there are these kind of microvascular thrombosis, and these patients can just for the first time present to us with acute kidney injury, shock, convulsions. Patients can present just with MI secondary to thromboembolic events, pulmonary embolism, pancreatitis, skin rash. All these presentations can present for the first time, and the patients could very well be in the cytokine storm. Okay, and these are the investigations. I'll not go much in detail. So what are the extrapulmonary pulmonary manifestations of COVID? I think it's there for everyone to see, and we have just discussed this. Sudden cardiac death is also observed in COVID-19, and the causes are more or less the same, like arrhythmia or silent MI or silent hypoxia, more related to the thromboembolic events. Now, how to proceed? At every visit, categorize your patient into mild, moderate, severe. For milder patients, categorize them into with or without comorbid conditions. Okay, we have just said what are the comorbid conditions. Asymptomatics and mildly symptomatics, but without comorbid conditions, may be allowed home quarantine. They can probably do a teleconsultation with you, or if you are seeing COVID OPD, they may follow up with you. They need to do, check daily temperature and SpO2 monitoring at home, but under the guidance of healthcare worker. And routine investigations, you must ask them at presentation on the 5th day of illness and on the 8th day of illness, just to see if the patient is progressing in any which ways. Mildly symptomatic patients, that is only viremia type symptoms, but with comorbidities, ideally they need to be under observation. You can start them on oral antivirals like favipiravir. If their QTC interval permits, you may even put them on HCQS, though there is no much proven benefit to that. With prophylactic low molecular weight heparin, which is compulsory in these kind of patients, temperature saturation monitoring with investigations at regular interval. And anybody falling in moderate to severe category, it's like every visit categorize the patient, every telephone call categorize the patient, okay, and categorize them into mild, moderate, severe based on their complaints, their investigations, and their probably CT or X-ray report if you have done. So if they progress to mild or severe category, or if they present for the first time in mild to severe category, you need to ask them to hospitalize. Now, these are the treatment options. If the patient is hypoxic, you will need to give oxygen as needed. If the oxygen demand is less, then probably via nasal prong, slightly more via mask, Hudson's mask. If even more than that, by non-rebreather mask. Very high oxygen requirements, patients are greatly benefited by high flow nasal oxygen. These patients really do not tolerate non-invasive ventilation so well, that is probably BiPAP or non-invasive ventilation. But some subset of patients do tolerate and they may do well with NIV or invasive ventilation if the patient's PO2 by FiO2 ratio is gradually going and it goes below 150 despite you maximizing your oxygen efforts. Okay. Remdesivir, low molecular weight heparin, steroids, tocilizumab, itolizumab, convalescent plasma therapy. You need to cover with antibiotics based on the patient's clinical condition. If the patients are, hypoxic, you need to give them awake proning, which is really shown to give a very good benefit in these patients. Initially, it was done only for patients on ventilator, but awake proning is done in a big way in patients of COVID with, hypoxia. Fluids only as needed unless they are found in shock. You need to be really conservative with fluids, and you need to keep the patient slightly on the drier side. Anti-fibrotic medicines, yes, they are upcoming. Still more and more talk is being done about it. And most important, if your patient, with God's grace and with your excellent efforts, if the patient goes home nicely, they definitely need to have pulmonary rehabilitation, which is a very overlooked part, but which needs to come in a big way. So now I think the time does not permit me, and I think I have overcrossed my time. So Madam Moderator, you need to tell me if I can cover, 6 slides which I have of the medicines.
I think, Madam, you can go ahead with the slides.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Should I go ahead?
Yes, ma'am, you can.
Yeah. So now we'll just cover the major treatment options that we have in hand, and which have a really good treatment recovery rates, or you can say the effect on the patient is seen. But the treatments do come with certain caveats, and if we follow them, the treatments these medicines are having a good effect on the patients. Remdesivir, very much talked about, very much, people probably have confused it because of the social media or the statements coming from people who are not supposed to be talking about the medical profession. But Remdesivir, in my experience, in whatever the number of patients I have treated till now, if you treat the patients at the right time with Remdesivir, it is a wonderful, wonderful drug with very little side effects which are seen on the patients. Okay. It is an antiviral for moderate to severe cases, best if used in first 10 days of illness. So if you see here, your day of onset of illness, for you to quantify your date of onset of illness is very, very important. If a patient who has come to you with 40% lung involvement and says that I have fever only since yesterday, and if you happen to say that that is day 1 of illness, you will be greatly making a mistake, because if it has gone into the pulmonary phase, we just saw that pulmonary phase, it takes about 8 to 10 days for or rather 6 to 10 days for that virus to enter into the pulmonary phase. Okay. And so if the lung involvement is seen, probably the patient has presented you during that phase. Okay, it is a 5-day course, not as a 7-day or 10-day course that some people are propagating. There are very few contraindications to this. There is if the transaminases, the liver transaminases, if they are more than 5 times the normal, or if the patient is on renal replacement therapy, or if the patient's GFR is less than 30, or if by giving one injection, probably you find that the patient is having hypersensitivity. Pregnant and lactating mothers or children under 12 years of age. These are the only contraindications where you should not be giving Remdesivir. The dosage is on day 1, it will be 200 milligram. One vial is 100 milligrams. So on day 1, it is 2 vials dissolved in 100 ml of normal saline given over 1 hour. And from day 2 to day 4, it will be 1 vial per day given over 1 hour diluted. Your patient selection, now this is as approved by the government of Maharashtra. There are 2 types of patients that we see. Some patients, as I said, come only with CT report without a COVID report. And the first subset of patients is group A. They have a CT confirmation and they have a COVID positive report also. So subjects with SpO2 less than 94 on room air, needing supplemental oxygen, so it is moderate to severe cases we are saying. So even needing mechanical ventilation, you see radiographic infiltrates by imaging, or if you see that the patient is in 7th, 8th day and still running high grade fever, please go ahead and give Remdesivir. It really works good. Okay. Group B patients are the ones who do not have a positive report with them. So they have either they are negative or they have not done the test till now, but they have symptoms of SARI. SARI is sudden acute respiratory illness, that is fever with cough, dyspnea or dropping saturation. So giving you a high clinical index of COVID-19. The CT CORAD score should be 5, and the CT severity index, which I have just explained, should be more than or equal to 9/25. Because these CT, this ground glass opacities, crazy paving pattern, these are typically seen only and only in COVID. So if your radiologist is giving you a CT report of CORAD score 5 and a severity index of 9 or above, then go ahead and give Remdesivir to your patients, and the pharmacies are giving it on your proper prescription and a detailed description with the CT report and or your COVID positive report. Steroids not to be used in OPD basis, not to be used otherwise. They are to be used only and only if the patients are seen to be desaturating. They work basically as anti-inflammatory. Methylprednisolone, what there are texts which are coming in saying that DEXA works good, but in my particular clinical experience, what I have seen, I have not really seen a very beneficial effect with DEXA, but methylprednisolone, yes, works good. So in moderate cases, you can give 0.5 to 1 milligram per kg per day in divided doses. And in severe patients, you may increase up to 1 to 2 milligram per kg per day in divided doses. If the patients present to you with severe illness, then yes, you may have to give MPSs for a prolonged period of time. And in that case, you may have to give tapering doses after discharge or once the patients are taken off injectable steroids. And you have to anticipate sugar rise because, even if non-diabetics, COVID is seen to be giving sugar fluctuations or probably, more of hyperglycemia. So you need to be careful, monitor and give insulin as and when needed. Anti-inflammatory and immunologic drugs, as we know, there's a big brouhaha about tocilizumab, whether to use, not to use. In some subset of patients, we have really seen drastic improvement in the patient, but in some subset of patients, even in cytokine storm, the help has really not been much. So, now we hear two theories, as I said, cytokine storm and bradykinin dysregulation, which is coming in. So probably if the patient is not so in cytokine storm, but more of bradykinin dysregulation, then maybe, these drugs may not work so well, but there is no way by which we can really differentiate between the two. So used in cytokine storm, basically when you on oxygen, the patient was stable, but you see suddenly that the patient is worsening, becoming more breathless. The patient's vitals are fluctuating. Patient has probably developed hypoxia, hypotension, increased tachycardia. The patient has suddenly started having more cough, and the patient needs much more requirement of oxygen compared to before. Then you have to suspect that the patient may be in cytokine storm. As I said, generally seen between 8th to 12th day, but not confined to that. Some patients are seen on 14th or 15th day of the illness of going into the cytokine storm. So tocilizumab, this is the dose. I'll not go into the detail. Single dose may be repeated if the IL-6 CRP, is still high after giving one dose. The dose may be repeated once after 24 hours, but not more than that. Itolizumab, not much clinical experience with that, but it is, mentioned as one of the drugs which is helpful in cytokine storm, but I really do not have any personal experience with this particular drug. But we must remember this will be suppressing the immunity, tocilizumab. So we have to be very careful while giving this drug. There may be rebound viremia after giving this drug, and it brings down patients' immunity. So patients who are already having a low WBC count, they may go into sepsis, okay, when these agents are given. So before giving this, do a procalcitonin on the patient, see if there is already underlying sepsis on the patient, and do check if the patient is having any active TB, then this drug is not to be given. There are certain other contraindications. I'll not get into that details, and reserved for severe cases only. And this low molecular weight heparin, probably underused, but very, very important. I've already mentioned even patients who are mildly symptomatic but having comorbid illnesses, when you put them in isolation ward, they need to be on prophylactic doses of low molecular weight heparin. Moderate category patients need to be on prophylactic doses of low molecular weight heparin. But the patients who are in the severe category, they need to be in therapeutic doses of low molecular weight heparin, because even if the D dimer is not very high, thromboembolic complications are very, very, very rampantly seen in these kind of patients. Do check contraindications, assess the bleeding risk by Hasbled score, okay, and monitor D dimer. You can give it for 3 to 5 days, depending on the patient's D dimers. If they're really high, there are times when we have given it even for 10 days. And if the D dimer is really high, then probably at presentation or later on, then on discharge also patients are given oral anticoagulants for 1 to 3 months. Okay, so convalescent plasma off-label use. When we say off-label, means it's an experimental thing. If you feel it is right on your patient, you can explain the pros and cons to the patient, and the relatives take a proper consent. Convalescent plasma has been used previously for SARS, MERS, and other illnesses, and it has shown to work, and that's why it has come up over here. 200 ml of ABO compatible plasma is obtained from a donor who has been documented to have recovered from COVID-19, but they need to have high titers of neutralizing antibodies. Okay, this is very important, because if they do not have high titers, this whole plasma thing is useless. And you need to have a case selection. It is effective only if you select the cases properly, of use only in moderate category of patients, because you understand you have to give ready-made antibodies you are trying to give, and they will be more effective only when the patient has an active virus in the body. So in the later stages, if you remember, what we see is more of an inflammatory damage and not of an immune response or a viral mediated damage. So in the severe cases, it is going to be less effective. So these are the case selection criteria. So last slide, and thank you for bearing with me. The take home message would be, please yourselves do not shy away from doing COVID test. Knowing your enemy is much better rather than not knowing, because then you know what you're dealing with, and then you can properly keep a watch on it. Prevention is the gold standard. There is no excuse to use of masks, social distancing, hand wash, use of sanitizers, use of PPE kits while seeing patients. Any patient walking into your OPD with, even with or without fever or respiratory symptoms, please consider them as COVID positive in this pandemic era, and you be dressed appropriately for that. Keep an adequate distance between you and patient. Avoid touching or going near the patient unnecessarily. Avoid touching face, mouth, or mask while handling patients in between your OPD. Regular monitoring with time test, SpO2 monitoring, walk test, temperature, etc. is going to give you a very good idea about the patient's worsening status. You need to learn to start anticipating complications, because if you start anticipating which patient may worsen, you can detect it early and you can really hit it faster and harder, and these patients have a better chance of recovery. Remdesivir has shown promising effect when it is used in time. Give steroids only if patient shows desaturation for a limited period of time. Use tocilizumab cautiously, try to time with a cytokine release syndrome, and low molecular weight heparin must find a place in treatment of all hospitalized patients based on the severity and with D-dimer levels. So thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Archana Madam. It was indeed in-depth and has covered almost everything about this enigmatic disease. Can we have the comment from our chairperson, Dr. Rakhi Agrawal?
Thank you, ma'am. Knowledge is power. Information is celebrating. Education is the premise of progress. Who else than Dr. Archana, ma'am? The most knowledgeable physician I know, and the very action woman. She is very well into the action committee of Dombivli. So hats off to you for the beautiful presentation what you have given. In very short time, you have covered from A to Z of the pandemic, and it is very important for all of us to know each and every word, and from the people like you who will always guide us to know more and more about this thing. The pandemics cannot be fought without the knowledge, and the way you have taught us, it is really hats off to you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Indeed, it was the best lecture. Can we have a word from Dr. Pratibha Borse, madam? Is she there?
Ma'am, perhaps she's not there.
Okay. No problem. So thank you, Archana madam. There must be a lot of questions, but we will be taking it afterwards. The viewers are requested to post their questions in the chat box. Yes, sure.
Rashmi?
Hello.
Rashmi, can I say a
Yes,
word
yes.
for ma'am?
Yes, definitely. Nilima,
Yes,
yes.
chat box is off. I think so. We are not ready, able to post anything. Congratulations, Archana ma'am. Indeed, a best lecture I have ever heard about COVID in detail, and you have given so very the recent guidelines how to treat and how to diagnose COVID. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello, Jagruti madam, over to you.
Yes. Hello, Archana madam. I would say this was really a best lecture, very detailed lecture and much needed. in this COVID time. And I hope there must be many queries regarding COVID to you. But as we are short of time, we will go ahead. But thanks a lot. It was wonderful presentation by you.
Thank you.
Thankful. We are very much thankful to you. And
Thank you
we
so
would
much.
like to present you a memento, which will be virtual. And after this time is over, we would be sending it to you, madam. Thank you very
Absolutely.
much. Pratik, please
Honored
present
to
the
be here.
memento to
Thank
madam.
you.
This is the memento, ma'am, to you, for
So
you.
sweet.
Yeah.
Thank you.